Hello everybody, I'm James Twyman and I'd like to welcome you to this tutorial made exclusively for aetuts.com. Before we begin, let me introduce myself to you. Like I said before, my name is James Twyman and I live in England. I own my own small film company and it's called JTMR Films. And we specialise commercially in music videos and promos and that kind of thing. And artistically we specialise in short films, and at the moment we're dabbling with feature film. And one of my favourite genres has always been horror. I absolutely love it, I can't get enough. But the problem with that is I've seen so many horror films that it's really difficult to A, scare me, and B, impress me. Because to me, horror is more than just about big special effects and scary monsters and ghosts flying around all over the place and CG elements and things that make you jump that have nothing to do with the storyline. To me, it's about subtlety. It's about tension. It's about having scenes that drip with it. It's about being on the edge of your seat throughout the entire film. And it's about the characters and the story and the setup. And so the special effects are there only to enhance that experience. It's really important that horror, as with every other genre, is never centered around the special effects, but that the special effects enhance the quality of the overall experience. And that includes colour grading. So today, what we're going to look at is colour grading and special effects specifically for the horror genre. Let's have a little look at what we're going to create. Okay, so now we've had a look at that, let's go into After Effects and I'll explain to you a little bit more about what we're doing. The first shot, you'll notice, is of a house, and this is the original shot that I went out and got with my camera. And there's a couple of things about this shot which you'll notice. First of all, is this blown out sky over here. The second thing you'll probably notice is the fact that in the shot that I just showed you, the light was on in this window, and here it's not. You'll also notice the sky has been replaced, and you'll also notice that the colour grading is quite harsh and it's got this really uneasy green tint to it. This was all something that I intended when I actually did the shot. In the second shot, you'll notice that we've got this relatively normal looking gargoyle face, and what we've done is over time we've animated the eyebrows to give this really nice evil frown and give that gargoyle a bit more of a character. So that's what we're going to be creating today. We're going to be looking at three different things. So this tutorial, although it's one tutorial, will be split into three different sections. The first section is going to look at how to do this wonderful sky replacement that you see here. The second part is going to be specifically toward the colour grading of the shot. And the third section is going to be creating this wonderful animation where the eyebrows frown evilly at its victim, and then at the end they unfrown. There we go. So without further ado, let's jump straight into the first section, sky replacement. Okay, so here's section 1, sky replacement. Before we begin, I'm going to show you my setup here in After Effects. As you notice, I've got two folders set up, one's called Comp, one's called Footage. I've also got these two elements here, which I'll explain in a moment. It's really important to keep your workspace really tidy, and I know for anybody who's used After Effects at any length of time, that's going to be a really basic thing that you're probably doing anyway, but for anybody who's new to this, keep your projects nice and tidy. Because if you're using a lot of comps, what's going to happen is it's going to get very messy, and it's going to be very difficult to find things. So just spending a little time before you start your compositions and your effects, just to make sure it's nice and organized and nice and tidy, is going to save you a lot of time. I've got two folders here, my footage, this is all my raw footage here, and my compositions, which at the moment doesn't have anything in it. I've got this, which is my anamorphic PSD file, which I created inside of Photoshop because I do love anamorphic as an aspect ratio. That is optional for you. You can keep it in widescreen or 4:3 if that's what you like, but for this particular tutorial I'm going to be working at creating my composition and giving it an anamorphic look. And I've also got my sky here, and this is the sky that we're going to use to replace. This is an image gotten from Flickr. You have to be very, very careful when getting photos from Flickr or anywhere else, because there's a lot of copyright issues. People get a little bit angry if they haven't given you permission to use their photographs. So the best way to get around that is when you go onto Flickr, click on the advanced search options, so go down to the bottom and tick the checkbox for view only those with Creative Commons license, and then there's two more tick boxes underneath, use commercially and freedom to modify, and tick those two as well, and you will only get images where people have given you permission to use them commercially and change them as you want. That gets around all kinds of copyright issues, especially when you're working with a client. So, without further ado, let's begin. We're going to start off by getting our house MPEG, and we're going to drag it down to a new composition, and we're going to choose just the section that we want to keep. And I want just this man walks into the shot and looks up at the window, and that's the section that I want just there. It's about 6 seconds long. So let's just take it back. I'm going to hit B on my keyboard, and you'll notice that the yellow marker has gone to where my current time indicator is, which now tells me that's where the start of the composition will be. And I'm going to move forward to 8 seconds. I'm going to hit N, which is going to make it the end of my composition. And I'm just going to right click on the work area bar and go down to trim comp work area, and that's now going to be my full composition. There we go. Okay, so the first thing that I want to do is I want to duplicate my footage twice. I'm going to hit Control on the keyboard and hit D twice, and that gives me 3 instances of the same thing, and I'm just going to rename them. The first one's going to be my alpha matte. This is going to be my empty sky, and this is going to be my filler. Okay, and then all 3 of these layers are going to have very, very specific jobs. I'm just going to shut off the bottom 2, and I'm going to create what's called an alpha matte. For anybody who doesn't know what an alpha matte is an image that consists of 2 colours, black and white, and anything in between that you can have greys. And basically what that image tells the computer is everything that's white has to be visible, and everything that's black has to be invisible. The best way to explain that really is just to show you what I'm going to do. So in order to create an alpha matte here, I'm just going to go to Effect, Color Correction, Colorama. This is a very powerful filter, and it's going to help you do a lot. What we're going to do is we're going to look at mainly this output cycle. We're not going to worry about any more of these settings. It's just this color wheel here where the power of this effect really comes into play. And we're going to go to Use Preset Palette, Ramp Gray. And what that does, it turns into a grayscale image. And we're going to click at about 9 o'clock and choose black, and watch what happens. This is what I mean about a 2-tone color image. Okay, here we've got a white area, and this is telling the computer when I turn it into an alpha matte, everything in this white area has to be visible. Now for those of you wondering, well, isn't the sky supposed to be invisible? We're going to do a process later on which is going to invert that so that the sky is the thing that's invisible. And I'm just going to click just above that black triangle and make another white triangle, and that's just going to define the black and the white areas a little bit more. I'm just going to work on that. Bring that down a bit maybe. Very nice. That's kind of what we're looking for. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go down to here, and we're going to click on our empty sky, and we are going to make it visible. Okay, it's not going to make any changes at the moment. Now we've got this little button here, Track Matte. If you can't see this button, and instead it looks like this, you've got all these little checkboxes. What you need to do is hit F4 on the keyboard, and that will bring up this small menu here. And we're going to go to Track Matte, and we're going to go to Luma Matte Inverted. And what that means is that we're inverting this image. If we just go to Luma Matte, all the white bits are going to be visible, and we're going to be able to see the sky. But if we go to Luma Matte Inverted, it means it's going to swap those two channels, and this will happen. Can you see that? You can see that the sky has entirely gone. You can probably also see that we've lost a lot of the windows and any other white area on the shot, which is why we have this filler layer. So we're just going to turn on the filler layer really quickly, and it brings everything back, and we're going to make a mask. And the way we do that is by selecting the layer, going up to this pen tool, and we're very roughly going to make a mask just around the sections which include those other white areas that we want to keep. And what you'll notice once I've done that is it's filled in all of those little gaps. If I just switch it on and off, you can see that now this shot looks seamless. And the only part that's missing is the part that we want to be missing, and that's the sky. You've probably also noticed by now there's a lot of jagged edges, there's a lot of blue left, but don't worry, we're going to go in and correct that a little bit later. But before we do that, we're just going to select all of our layers and we're going to pre-compose them. And pre-composing basically puts all of these three layers into a new composition just to help us minimize the amount of layers we've got going on at one time. So we're going to go down to Layer, Pre-compose, and we're going to call this House. And we're going to hit Enter. Make sure Move All Attributes is checked, it's the only thing we can do at the moment. Enter. As you can see, that's made absolutely no changes apart from the fact that that's now in a new composition. If we want to make any changes to that, if you're in After Effects CS4, you double click it. If you're in anything less than After Effects CS4, you want to press Alt and double click it. What we're going to do now is we're just going to add that sky, just so we kind of know what our composition is going to look like a little bit later. We're just going to drag the sky layer down to the bottom below House, and we're going to move it up, and you can see there that that's beginning to look really good, and we're just going to scale that up. And I'm going to use this section of the sky because I think it looks absolutely gorgeous. Look at that, looking really good. As you can see, it started to look pretty good. Something that I've noticed is the problem is this orange is going to show through quite a lot when we do our colour grading. So I'm just going to select the layer, I'm going to go to Effect, Colour Correction, Hue and Saturation, and I'm just going to bring the saturation down almost entirely. We don't want that sky to have any of its own colour really, but we still want to keep some of that contrast. So, the last section of this is going to be to just fix these elements around here. You know, the jagged edges that we've got on the house layer, and the way that we do that is by going to Effect, Matte, and Matte Choker. And immediately you can see the difference that makes. Let me just show you again in case you missed it. Before, jagged edges, looking a bit horrible. After, looks a lot cleaner, looks a lot nicer. And what we're going to do is we're just going to change the geometric softness a little bit. We're going to bring up that choke a little bit more. That's starting to look really nice. Choke it maybe just a tad more. Bring up the softness a little, and we're just going to play around with that for a couple of minutes. I want you to remember that what's really important about this tutorial is that I'm doing everything really quickly for you. My intention for this tutorial is to show you the techniques so that you can then go away and perfect them. So although I'm doing it really quickly, I want you to make sure you spend enough time on each different section of the effect, because when you do that, it's going to look a lot better. Don't just think because I'm doing it quickly, it can be done quickly. A great special effects artist will spend hours tweaking and working on an effect to make it look absolutely perfect. But at the moment, for the purposes of the tutorial, that looks really good. So there we have it. The sky has been replaced. Now what I did as well, and I did this was more of a personal choice than anything, is I created a fake depth of field. A, to disguise some of this blue, and B, because I just personally really like the look of it. And the way that I did that really quickly is I just went into Adjustment Layer. The way that I did that, by the way, is I right-clicked in a blank area down here near my timeline and went to New Adjustment Layer. and I'm just going to hit enter with the layer selected so that I can change the name of it. I'm going to change it to DOF, depth of field, and I'm then going to apply an effect to it, and that effect is called blur, and it's a special kind of blur called Gaussian blur. And I'm just going to bring that up, and you can see what that starts to do to the image. It starts to blur it out really nicely. And then with the layer selected still, I'm going to go to the rectangle tool, and I'm going to create a rectangle to the left of the screen. And I'm going to hit M twice on my keyboard, and I'm going to feather that up to quite a high level. And that's created a nice gradiated depth of field that's disguised some of the imperfections, and I think it just makes it look a lot nicer. So that is section 1, the sky replacement. Remember, really take your time with replacing the sky. It's an effect that is really easy to learn, but really difficult to master. And if you want to be really good at special effects, you're going to want to spend that time really mastering it. Okay, so here we go, part 2. We're going to look at colour grading. Now, before I begin with the colour grading, there's something I really need to discuss with you. And that is a trend that is happening in amateur filmmaking and in newcomers to compositing and colour grading and filmmaking. And that is that colour grading is seen as a way to turn a lower grade format, i.e. DV, and make it look like a higher grade format, like for example film. I mean, you see it all over the place. People looking in forums, searching on the internet, programs that say we can make your DV footage look like film. And I just want to say no to this. That's absolutely ridiculous, because DV and film are so fundamentally different in how fantastic they are and their quality, that you're never going to make DV come anywhere near film. Colour grading should be about evoking emotion. It should be about taking a scene and saying, what does this need to say to the audience, and how can the coloration of each shot help get that across. So for example, I'm doing a horror movie here, so it needs to be dark to get that whole idea of a dark, brooding atmosphere. But it also needs to have some off colouring, so it can't just be dark. It needs to have a colour that makes the audience feel a little bit uneasy, and I've chosen a very, very dark, uneasy green. I haven't done it because I want to make my HD footage look like it was shot on 35mm, because it's just not going to happen. And the problem with that is, as I said before, is it makes it look even more amateur than just shooting on DV. Because people can see that you've tried to make it something it's not. And what you want to do with colour grading is, regardless of the format that you're shooting on, try and make it look great. Try and make the colour grading have a point. If you're shooting on DV, you need to make a movie that looks amazing, that was shot on DV. If you're shooting on HD, make a movie that's amazing and that was shot on HD. Don't try and make it something it's not. Enjoy the colour correction process as an artistic outlet for your film. So without further ado, we're going to learn how it's done. Now there's 3 stages to colour grading. You've got your enhancement, which brings the image out of the screen and sorts out the colours and just makes it look deeper and more fantastic looking. Then you've got the second part, which is the coloration, which helps you to add a mood or a feeling to the shot or the scene. And the third is the cherry on the cake. Okay, and that's what just gives it that little something. Sometimes it's not overly noticeable, but there's just something that makes your shot stand out. And we're going to learn how it's done, and we're going to use adjustment layers. So the first thing I want you to do is right click in a blank space and click New, Adjustment Layer, and we're going to name this Master Color Grading. Okay, hit enter and put that beneath the anamorphic, and we're going to add 3 effects to that: color correction, curves, color correction, hue and saturation. The curves is to add depth, the color correction is to make sure the colors are consistent. Color correction, levels, just for the small tweaks at the end, just to make sure it all looks fantastic. And the first thing we're going to do is I want to show you what this curves does. Okay, it's a long line, as you can see here down, and a 4x4 grid. And what this allows me to do is to click anywhere on the line and create a point, and I can then drag that point up or down and it manipulates how dark or light the image is. If I drag the bottom part down, we're looking at the shadows here. So if I bring the shadows down ever so slightly, you'll see when I release, it gets darker. Okay, and those shadows start to become more pronounced. Then what I do is I click up near the top, I've made another one, and begin to drag up, and that brings the highlights out. Okay, let me just show you what I've done there. Originally it was really flat, and this has just brought those shadows and those highlights out just enough to make the shot stand out a little bit more. And I'm just going to brighten that and darken these just a little bit more, make that S curve, which is what this particular curve adjustment is called, that little bit stronger. Now the problem with that is, when you are doing this, it affects the colour channels as well, because I'm going in the full RGB colour. If I want to affect one colour channel, if I want to affect just the red, I can choose red, green, blue, and if I want to check the sort out the alpha, I can use the alpha mode here. But when I'm using RGB, it darkens all the colours and it lightens all the colours retrospectively of where they are on the spectrum. So what I want to do is I want to go into hue and saturation and take the master saturation, and I want to bring it down, just so that that's not too overpowering. There we go, that looks a lot better, and it's not so overpowering in terms of that orange that was coming out before. So that's the first two things. They are a given on every shot that you ever do. Seriously, people, colour grading is very, very important, and those are the two of the most important things you will do on every single shot, because they'll bring them out of the screen and make them look more professional. So those two things are unbypassable, so get used to them. Then I'm going to go down to levels, and I'm just going to take this triangle at the bottom, and you can see it's got this histogram here. I'm going to bring the first one, which is on the far right. I'm going to move it left a little bit. This is the white channels. I'm just going to bring it to the beginning where the histogram starts to raise up, and I'm going to do the same with the black point here. And this just makes sure that all the black points and the white points are perfect, so there's nothing's overpowering, nothing's overexposed. I don't have to do too much on this particular shot, but some shots you may find there's a little bit of overexposure, and just tweaking that can sometimes make all the difference. So that's the first section of the colour grading. It's stupidly easy. Okay, it's probably the easiest part because it's not really a creative part. It is quite necessary to make your shot look great. The next part's the bit that's more difficult. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new solid, and it's going to be a kind of a deep green. And I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to put that below the master grading, and you can see everything's gone green. Now we're going to look at something called blending modes. Remember, if you haven't got this up and you can't see this, you want to hit F4, because you'll be able to see this instead. There's two menus, there's this one and this one. If you can see this one, you just want to hit F4 and bring up this one. Okay? And we're going to look at blending modes. Now blending modes are great fun. What they do is they, on a really basic level, using all kinds of algorithms and maths and clever stuff that the people who wrote this program know about, but I don't. Basically what it does is looks at the layer that you're putting the blending mode onto, and then the layer or layers below, and decides how that layer reacts with the layers below. And let me show you how that works. If I click normal, and where it says normal I'm going to replace it and click on soft light, you'll see what happens is the green is still there, but it's reacting with the coloration of the layers underneath, and it's also reacting with the highlights and the shadows. So where it's lighter or white, the green is lighter, and where it's darker and more shadowy, the green is darker, and it makes it look like a more realistic looking filter. If I was, for example, going to go for darker colour, you can see that does something completely different. What if I want to go to screen? Again, it makes the whole image brighter, but still reacts with the shadows and the highlights. So have a play around with blending modes, because they're really good fun. But the one that we're going to use today is going to be soft light. You can use overlay, but I prefer soft light. I think it looks better. Okay, now the first thing that I notice, and you probably noticed, is the green is too bright to be a dark and brooding scene. So I'm just going to go to Effect, Color Correction, Curves, and I'm going to bring the colour down a little bit. There we go, that looks a lot better already. It looks a lot better. Something else that you'll notice, that I've noticed, is that orange is still overpowering a little bit. It's still showing through a bit too much. So just above the house layer, I'm going to put another adjustment layer. Now there's no limit to the adjustment layers that you can put on, and there's no limit to the amount of effects that you can apply to any one layer. Just make sure you keep track of them, and the best way to do that really is to name them. So I'm just going to name this one House Color Grading, and of course this I'm going to call the filter. Okay, and on the house color grading, I'm going to go into effects. I'm going to go into color correction, hue and saturation, and bring the saturation down ever so slightly. I don't want to affect anything apart from the house layer. That's looking really good. I'm going to go to the master, and I'm going to bring that up a little bit. I'm just going to, there we go, that's looking quite good. I'm just going to bring the darkness down a little bit. I'm going to bring the highlights down a little bit. I'm just going to tweak it, and like I said before, you want to spend the time doing this, yeah, and tweaking it and making it look great, because that's how you're going to come up with a really good effect. Let's make this darker. There we go, and there we have a far nicer looking shot. Now the last thing I'm going to do in terms of the this part of the color grading, the bit where the second step, the coloration, is I'm going to add a diffuse, because I like diffusing the shot. It makes it look a little bit more I just think it looks nicer, to be honest with you. You can miss this part out if you really want to, but what I'm going to do, and just follow this along for now, I'm going to hit Control D with my house composition selected to duplicate it. I'm going to go to Effect, I'm going to go to Gaussian Blur, and I'm going to bring the Gaussian Blur right up, and then I'm going to hit Soft Light again. And you can see what that does. I'll just show you now quickly. Before, after. And it just adds a little bit of depth. I don't know if you can see that. It's just a little bit. It's more than the slightly less than the eye can probably take in and notice if you're just watching the shot. But for those of you watching the tutorial, you'll definitely see the difference. And I'm just going to go into the house color grading and bring that saturation down just a tad. And you can see that that just has added a nice fuzzy depth to the whole shot. And I think that works for what I'm trying to do. So, two things now that I'm going to do for the cherry on the top. And the first thing is I'm going to add a vignette. And the way that we do that is just above the, so I'm just going to move these all below. Just above the master grading, I'm going to go into new adjustment layer, and I'm going to open up curves again. I'm going to bring the curves right down so that I can almost not see what's going on in that shot. And just here where you've got the rectangle tool, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click it and hold it, and it brings out this menu, and I'm going to go to ellipse tool, I'm going to release, and then double click that icon. Okay, so you can see what I've done there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to the mask, and I'm going to hit M a couple of times on the keyboard and make it subtract. And what you can see that's done is the outside edges are dark and the inside is nice and normal and bright. But you'll notice if I click away from this, it's very, very harsh. So what we're going to do is go to Mask Feather and bring that up quite a lot. And we've created what's called a vignette, and it just adds a little bit of depth again to the shot, and before and after. And these are all things you want to play with. Spend some real time. When I first did this shot, I spent, no word of a lie, I spent a couple of hours just trying to get my colour right. Okay, it's really important that you spend that kind of time on this section, really making the shot look great. Once you've done it for the first shot and you've got an idea of what it looks like, you can then take a lot less time just applying those effects to the rest of the shots and making it look consistent. But for that first shot where you're really trying to develop your look and style of your film, spend a long time. Okay, so the last thing we're going to do is we're going to add a light to this window, and the way we're going to do that, dead simple, we're going to add another solid. Okay, and we're going to add a nice pale yellow solid like this. Hit OK, and it's taken over everything. We're going to apply, put it underneath everything. I'm going to call this one, I don't know how to spell vignette, so I'm just going to put Vignette. That's kind of how you spell it. And I'm just going to turn off my yellow solid. I'm going to go right in here, and I'm going to take my pen tool, which creates a mask, and I'm going to select, make sure the medium yellow solid, in fact I'm going to name it window, make sure the window layer is selected, and then I'm going to use my pen tool to mask out each of these windows. Okay, and if you've used masks before, you'll pretty much get an idea of what we're about to do. Like I said before, take some time with it, really work with the style. And the great thing about working in a digital format is that if something doesn't work, you can just change it. Okay, and that's the really good thing about this. If a certain colour isn't working, or it's a little bit overexposed, you've got a lot of control. over the final look of your image. If you're shooting a day for night, which is kind of what this is, where I've taken a daytime shot and made it darker, try and underexpose ever so slightly if it's a really bright day, so that you've got more control over those shadows and highlights as well. It's another quick tip for you. I'm just going to move that about a bit. I'm going to bring that back, and then I'm going to hit M a couple of times on the keyboard. I'm going to choose the first mask, go down to the bottom mask, hit Shift, and click on that, and that selects them all. And I'm just going to ramp up that masking, and now I can pull it out. I can show you what that looks like. The light is now on, and you can mess around with the blending modes for this as well. I personally don't think it's needed, so I'm going to keep it normal. And you can see now if I turn it off, light off, light on, light off, light on, and that just adds a little bit of a spooky element to your shot. So there's colour grading for you. Notice I haven't tried to make my DV footage look like film. I've not tried to make it something it's not. What I've done is I've looked at the genre of my film and the feeling that I want to convey and what I want the audience to get from it, and I've tailored my colour correction specifically to that, and that's where the art of colour correction really comes in, and you can really have creative fun over it, and really make a film that looks and feels fantastic. Okay, so that's colour grading for you. Next up, we're going to look at the frowning face technique. Okay, so here we are, the final section of the tutorial, and we're actually now going to learn a proper special effect. We're going to make that statue frown evilly at its victim, the movie. But before we do that, we're just going to clean up our project a little bit. I'm just going to take these two house comps and drag them into the composition folder. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the face layer, the face MPEG, and drag it into Make New Comp button, and that opens up in a new composition. I'm also going to drag in my anamorphic PSD, place that on top so that I can now move the face up a little bit just to centralize it a bit more into the image. Wonderful. So that's our preparation done. All of our footage is in our composition. We're now going to start to animate. Note on animation that is very, very important. As far as I'm concerned, I am not animating a face because it looks cool. I am animating a face because it has a meaning in the film, and most importantly, the face has a character. It doesn't just squint and then unsquint in a very kind of uniform and abrupt way. It's got to have a character. I need to have full control over all of the facial muscles that you would normally find inside of a face, even though it's only made out of stone, because through doing that you create a performance, and that's what you want to do. This is not necessarily a wow, look at that special effect. This is the creation of a performance from an inanimate object, and you must keep that in mind throughout the entire thing. So let's go ahead and create this performance. I'm going to show you how it's done, and it's dead easy, and it's a really, really powerful effect, and you can use it for loads of cool stuff. With my face selected, I'm going to go to Effect, Distort, and down here at the bottom, here we go, sorry, in the middle, you've got Liquify. That is the effect that we're going to use. Now the Liquify tool, let me just show you what it does really quickly. The Liquify tool allows me then to manipulate the facial features of our statue, and I can open his mouth and all kinds of cool stuff. And then what I can do is use distortion percentage, which is where the power of this thing really lies, to animate the face. And I can go over the top a little bit if I want to. The problem with this is I have limited it to one facial expression that I can get him to use. Okay, so I'm going to undo everything that I've just done. In fact, I'm just going to delete the Liquify tool, and I'm then going to reapply it. Okay, and what I'm going to do is, because I'm just using the eyes and making the eyes squint, I'm not doing anything with the mouth, I'm going to break it up into 4 different sections. Top of the eyes, 1, 2, and the bottom of the eyes, 3, 4. And when it comes to the bottom of the eyes, I'm also going to manipulate the cheeks ever so slightly, because as I said at the beginning of the tutorial, when you squint your eyes, your cheeks, they also move as well. And if I was just to move the eyes, it would look a little bit fake, but because I'm adding that subtle cheek movement as well, it just makes the face look a little bit more organic, makes the performance a little bit more authentic, and that's what you want to go for. If I'm using the mouth, which I'm not going to here because it's a little bit too complicated for a short tutorial, I will produce a number of different shapes for the mouth using different liquify filters, and then I'll merge between them to create a lip syncing, so that the fluidity of the mouth movements matches the fluidity of the speaking, and so that the performance really starts to show. And so my statue is no longer a special effect, it's a character, and it's an actor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my liquify tool and I'm going to duplicate it 3 times. Control D, D, D. There we go. I'm just going to close them off for now. I'm going to rename them. So I'm going to hit enter. I'm going to call that left eye top, left eye bottom, right eye top, right eye bottom. That now gives me 4 different things that I can animate, and the power of that is that I can animate only one thing. So for example, I'll show you as we go along. What I'm going to do, I'm going to select this tool here. Now there's a load of different tools, they all do different things. This one, for example, you can see starts to bulge things out, make it a little bit wavy. This here twists. This shrinks stuff, make his eyes small. Looks a little bit freaky. This here makes things fat, so I can make him a nice big nose. And they all just really do different things. This shifts my pixels around so that I can just move it and give it a doo 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 doo. He looks like it's been a bit of a fight. And really just loads of different tools. Have fun with it. But one we're going to use here is this tool, and we're going to use this to shape our layer. So we're just going to zoom in, and I'm just going to use the top of the left eye, our left, not his left, and I'm just going to create a frown look. I'm just going to do it down here at the bridge of the nose, bring it in, and then just bring that up a tad, like so. Really subtle, you don't want to do too much, otherwise it starts to look pixelated and really, really bad. Okay, I'm just going to close that off. I'm going to go into my left eye bottom, and I'm going to zoom in again. Not too much, not a bit too much. And I'm going to start to close off that eye. Make it look really evil. And then I'm just going to take the cheek, and I'm just going to begin to move it along where the muscles would be. Just ever so slightly, doesn't need to be too much, because what that will then do is that will then, if I go too far it looks a little bit weird, but if I go in between 99 and 100, it just kind of makes it look a little bit more authentic. Let's turn that back to 100. Okay, I'm going to go to the right eye top, I'm going to do the same, dead quickly. You can make any number of expressions doing this. Again, just a slight movement to the cheeks, and there we have our evil look. Evil. So now all that leaves us to do is to animate, and the way that we do that is dead easy. We simply keyframe the distortion percentage, so we're going to go to about 5 seconds, and I'm going to keyframe the distortion percentage. And then I'm going to select my face layer and hit U, which brings up all my keyframes. I'm just going to select all of those layers, and simultaneously I'm going to bring them all down to 0. I'm going to move forward a few frames. I'm going to bring them all up to 100. Then I'm going to go to about 15 seconds. I'm going to keyframe them all. For anybody who doesn't know what a keyframe is, basically what a keyframe is it says at this keyframe this is what the picture will look like, and then the second keyframe it says at this keyframe this is what the image will look like now, and anything in between those two keyframes will then be blended into those two different looks, which is how you create animation. And I'm just going to bring that back down to 0 for all of them. So as you can see, what happens here is it animates in erg, and you can see the movement of those cheeks just adds a bit of fluidity, adds a bit of realism to that performance. And then he's frowning, he's a bit angry, I don't know, maybe somebody eated his cookie, and then oh, he got his cookie back. So there we have our effect, and you can do so many cool things with this effect. You can animate an animate face. If you go over to videocopilot.net, he shows you how to make a cool demon effect. You can do all kinds of really weird warped things with the Liquify tool, so have fun with that. So that is the end of our tutorial. We've gone through 3 very important things. We've gone through sky replacement, we've gone through color correction, and we've gone through animating and the importance of making animation fluid and natural and how we do that. I really hope you've learned something from this tutorial, and if you like the tutorial, leave some comments on the comment section. Let me know if this is what you liked, let me know things I can improve for my next tutorial, and also let me know of anything you really want to learn, because that's really where these tutorials come into their own, when you're learning something that you really want to learn. So leave some comments. I hope you really enjoyed it, and I hope that I get to make another tutorial for you sometime soon. Have fun compositing.